You ever hear the stories of Elysium? Some call it a myth, a forgotten city that only appears to those who have lost their way, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. Others swear it's real, a place hidden deep in the wilderness, shrouded in mist and unreachable by any map. But the thing about Elysium is this: once you find it, you may never leave. This story begins with Aaron Cole, a journalist known for chasing urban legends. After years of uncovering fake haunted houses and debunking conspiracy theories, Aaron stumbled upon a whispered tale of a city that moves. A city that wasn't there one moment and appeared the next, glowing like a mirage before vanishing into thin air. He didn't believe it, of course, not until he received a letter. The envelope was old, the paper inside yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was neat, elegant, but urgent. Aaron, if you're reading this, it means I was right. Elysium exists, and I found it. But it's not what we thought. I can't explain it in words. You have to see it for yourself. Follow the enclosed coordinates, but be warned. Once you enter, there's no turning back. T. Marshall. Aaron's blood ran cold. Thomas Marshall was his college roommate, a historian who had vanished 2 years ago while chasing myths of the lost city. Everyone assumed he was dead. But this letter, postmarked 3 days ago, told a different story. The coordinates led Aaron to a remote stretch of wilderness deep in the Pacific Northwest. He drove for hours along desolate highways before abandoning his car on a dirt road that disappeared into dense, ancient woods. Armed with a flashlight, a notebook, and an old map, Aaron trekked deeper into the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting together like skeletal hands, blocking out the sun. The further he walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of his boots against the earth and the faint hum of the wind. And then, he saw it, a faint glow in the distance. Aaron froze. It shimmered faintly through the trees, like the light of a distant city reflected on low-hanging clouds. But there was no city here. No roads, no power lines, no sign of civilization for miles. He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. The glow grew brighter with every step, and soon he found himself standing at the edge of a vast clearing. There it was, Elysium. The city was unlike anything Aaron had ever seen. Its buildings were tall and elegant, their spires reaching into the dark sky. The architecture was ancient but pristine, with glowing patterns etched into the stone walls, pulsing faintly like veins of light. The streets were paved with shimmering cobblestones, and the air was filled with the faint hum of energy, like a distant song. But the strangest thing? There were people, hundreds of them, walking the streets in silence, their faces serene but empty. They moved in perfect rhythm, their footsteps echoing softly as if rehearsed. Aaron stepped into the clearing, his heart pounding. "This can't be real," he muttered. As he crossed the threshold, the air seemed to shift, growing heavy and electric. And then, the city turned toward him. It wasn't obvious at first. The glowing patterns in the stone walls shifted subtly, the pulse of their lights slowing as if they were watching. The people walking the streets stopped abruptly, their heads turning in unison toward Aaron. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto him, their expressions blank but unnervingly focused. Aaron froze. Hi?" No one responded. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city's energy. Then, a single figure stepped forward. It was a woman, her long white dress shimmering faintly in the glow of the city. Her face was strikingly beautiful, but her eyes, black and deep as the night, were hollow, devoid of any human warmth. "You've come," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. Aaron's throat tightened. "I got a letter from a friend. He said he found this place. Do you know him?" "Thomas Marshall." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Thomas is here. But he's different now." Aaron's stomach twisted. What do you mean, different? Where is he? The woman gestured toward the heart of the city, where a tall, circular tower loomed, its spire glowing faintly. Follow me, she said simply. Aaron followed her through the silent streets, his footsteps echoing loudly against the cobblestones. The other residents of Elysium watched him pass, their heads turning in unison, their faces blank and unnervingly calm. The woman led him to the base of the glowing tower. Its surface shimmered like liquid stone, and faint symbols pulsed across its surface, forming patterns that shifted as he stared. In here, she said. Aaron hesitated. What's inside? She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her hollow eyes. The truth. Before he could respond, the tower's doors slid open, revealing a glowing chamber filled with swirling light. Aaron stepped inside. The chamber was vast and empty, save for a single figure standing in the center. It was Thomas. But something was wrong. His once wiry frame was gaunt, his skin pale and almost translucent. Faint glowing lines ran across his arms and face, pulsing softly like veins of light. Thomas? Aaron's voice cracked. Thomas turned slowly, his hollow eyes locking onto Aaron. Aaron, he said, his voice soft but distant, like it came from a faraway place. You shouldn't have come. Aaron stepped closer, his heart pounding. What happened to you? What is this place? Thomas raised a trembling hand, gesturing to the walls of the chamber. This is Elysium, he said. A city of perfection. A place that takes your pain, your regrets, and leaves you with peace. Aaron frowned. Peace? You don't look peaceful, Thomas. You look empty. Thomas interrupted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That's the price of perfection, Aaron. To live in Elysium is to surrender everything else. Your fear, your anger, your sorrow, even your memories. Aaron's stomach twisted. That's not living, Thomas. That's being a shell. Thomas's eyes darkened. It's better than the alternative? What alternative? Thomas hesitated, his glowing veins pulsing faintly. You'll see. Suddenly, the chamber began to shift, the walls shimmering as the glowing patterns turned chaotic. The woman's voice echoed faintly from behind Aaron. The city has chosen you, Aaron. Now you must decide. Aaron turned sharply. Decide what? The woman stepped into the chamber, her hollow eyes fixed on him. Will you stay, or will you run? Aaron stood frozen in the glowing chamber, the hum of the city's energy pulsing faintly in the walls around him. The woman's hollow gaze bore into him, her voice sharp and melodic as it echoed in the vast space. Decide, Aaron. Will you stay, or will you run? His throat tightened. Stay? What does that even mean? I came here looking for answers, not... To stay is to become, the woman interrupted smoothly. Elysium does not allow visitors to remain unchanged. Those who stay transform. They become part of the city's perfection. Aaron's pulse quickened. And if I run? The woman's faint smile twisted, her expression unreadable. Then you will face the shadows. Thomas, standing motionless in the center of the room, spoke softly, his voice like the faint whisper of a breeze. The city doesn't let go, Aaron, not truly. If you leave, it will follow you, in ways you can't imagine. Aaron turned toward him, frustration boiling to the surface. Then why the hell did you send me that letter, Thomas? Why bring me here if there's no way out? Thomas's glowing veins pulsed faintly, his expression pained. I didn't send it, he said softly. The city did. Aaron's blood ran cold. What? Thomas's hollow eyes met his. Elysium chooses who it wants. It brings people here, not to save them, but to consume them. The woman's serene face didn't falter. Consume is a harsh word, she said calmly. We offer freedom. Freedom from pain, from regret, from the burdens of life. Aaron's fists clenched. At the cost of losing yourself? No thanks. The walls of the chamber shimmered, the glowing patterns twisting violently. The woman tilted her head, her hollow eyes narrowing. The city does not take rejection lightly. Suddenly, the floor beneath Aaron's feet trembled, and a sharp mechanical chime rang out, echoing through the chamber like a warning bell. Thomas's voice trembled. Aaron, you need to run, now. The walls began to shift, the glowing patterns turning jagged and chaotic. The air grew heavy, pressing down on Aaron's chest like an invisible weight. The woman's serene expression twisted into something darker, her hollow eyes burning faintly as she stepped closer. Run if you must, she said softly. But know this, the shadows will find you. Aaron didn't wait to find out what she meant. He turned and bolted through the open doors of the chamber, his footsteps echoing against the shimmering floor. The city outside was brighter now, its glow almost blinding as the streets seemed to shift and rearrange themselves before his eyes. The once silent residents of Elysium were no longer still. They moved with unsettling speed, their hollow eyes locking onto Aaron as he sprinted past. The tower, he muttered to himself, his breath ragged. I need to get back to the tower. But every street he turned onto twisted into a new path, the city rearranging itself like a living maze. The glowing patterns in the walls pulsed faster, the hum of energy rising into a sharp, dissonant pitch. And then, the shadows appeared. At first they were faint, a flicker of movement at the edge of Aaron's vision, a shifting darkness that didn't belong in the glowing city. But they grew quickly, spreading like ink spilled into water. Tall, humanoid forms with glowing red eyes emerged from the edges of the buildings, their bodies made of swirling black smoke. They moved silently, their elongated limbs twisting unnaturally as they glided toward Aaron. He ran faster, his lungs burning as the shadows closed in. Their whispers filled the air, sharp and fragmented, like shards of broken glass carried on the wind. Join us. Stay. You belong here. Aaron's pulse thundered in his ears. He turned a corner and nearly collided with one of the glowing residents, who stared at him with vacant eyes before stepping aside, almost mechanically. The shadows followed, their movements growing more erratic, more desperate. Ahead, Aaron spotted a gate, tall and glowing, its intricate patterns pulsing faintly. Please be an exit, he muttered, sprinting toward it. But as he reached the gate, the air seemed to harden, and an invisible force slammed into his chest, throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping for breath as the gate shimmered mockingly before him. You can't leave, a voice whispered. Aaron looked up to see the woman standing over him, her serene expression unfaltering. Elysium does not let go, she said softly. Not until you accept its gift. Aaron scrambled to his feet, backing away. I don't want your gift. The woman's hollow eyes darkened. Then the shadows will take you instead. The shadows surged forward, their twisted forms closing in from all sides. Aaron's back hit the glowing wall of a nearby building, and he pressed himself against it, his chest heaving as panic clawed at his throat. The shadows reached out with elongated fingers of smoke, their whispers rising into a deafening roar. But before they could touch him, a faint voice cut through the chaos. Aaron! He turned sharply. It was Thomas. His glowing veins pulsed violently, his expression strained as he reached out toward Aaron. This way! Aaron didn't hesitate. He ducked beneath the grasping hands of the shadows and ran toward Thomas, who was standing at the edge of a narrow alleyway. Thomas grabbed his arm and pulled him through, the shadows screeching behind them as they disappeared into the glowing streets. They didn't stop running until they reached a small, dimly lit alcove hidden between two towering buildings. Aaron collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air as sweat dripped down his face. Thomas knelt beside him, his hollow eyes filled with something faintly resembling guilt. I told you not to come, Thomas said softly. Aaron glared at him, his chest still heaving. You didn't exactly leave me much of a choice. Thomas looked away, his glowing veins flickering faintly. I thought maybe you could help me, he said, his voice trembling. But I was wrong. The city's too strong. It won't let either of us go. Aaron shook his head. There has to be a way. There's always a way. Thomas's lips pressed into a thin line. There is, he admitted. But it's dangerous. Aaron leaned forward, desperation burning in his eyes. Tell me. Thomas hesitated, his hollow eyes flicking toward the glowing patterns on the walls around them. There's a place, he said slowly. A heart, the source of the city's power. If we can reach it, we might be able to destroy it. Aaron's stomach twisted. Destroy it? What happens to you? To the people here? Thomas's expression darkened. I don't know. But if we don't try, the city will consume us both. The faint hum of the city grew louder, the glowing patterns in the walls pulsing faster. Aaron clenched his fists. Then let's end this. The hum of the city seemed to grow louder as Aaron followed Thomas through the dimly lit alleyways. The glowing patterns on the walls pulsed faster now, like a beating heart responding to their every step. The heart of the city, Aaron muttered under his breath. Where is it? Thomas glanced over his shoulder, his hollow eyes flickering with a strange light. It's buried deep beneath Elysium, he said, in the Chamber of Origins. The city doesn't want anyone to find it, so the path will be difficult. Aaron clenched his fists. Difficult how? Thomas hesitated before answering. The city will fight back. It will use whatever it can, your fears, your regrets, even your memories. It will twist them, turn them against you. Aaron's pulse quickened. Great. So, not just shadows, but a haunted labyrinth of my own trauma. Fantastic. Thomas didn't smile. They rounded a corner, emerging onto a narrow street lined with crooked stalls. The glowing residents of Elysium stood frozen, their blank faces turned toward Aaron and Thomas as they passed. They're not real, Thomas said softly, noticing Aaron's uneasy glance. Or at least, not anymore. The city drained them of everything, who they were, what they felt. Now they're just echoes. Aaron swallowed hard and kept walking.
And that
The entrance to the Chamber of Origins was hidden beneath a crumbling amphitheater at the edge of the city. The amphitheater's stone steps were cracked and overgrown with a strange, glowing moss that pulsed faintly in the darkness. At its center was a large, circular trapdoor, etched with the same intricate patterns that decorated the city's walls. This is it, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Aaron knelt beside the trapdoor, running his fingers over the glowing symbols. They felt warm to the touch, almost alive. How do we open it? Thomas stepped forward, his glowing veins pulsing faintly. The city recognizes those it's claimed, he said. I can open it. But once we're inside, it's all on you, Aaron. Aaron frowned. Why me? Thomas's hollow eyes met his. Because I'm already part of the city, he said softly. I can't fight it. But you're still whole. Aaron's chest tightened. Great, he muttered. No pressure. Thomas pressed his hand against the trapdoor. The glowing symbols flared brightly, and the door slid open with a low mechanical groan. A spiral staircase descended into the darkness below, its edges lined with faintly glowing runes. Aaron took a deep breath and stepped onto the first stair. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint hum of the city fading into an eerie silence. The Chamber of Origins was massive, a cavernous space filled with twisting stone pillars and flowing streams of glowing liquid that pulsed like veins in a living body. At the center of the chamber stood the heart. It was a massive, crystalline structure, suspended in midair by thick, glowing tendrils that stretched into the walls. The crystal pulsed with a deep, rhythmic light, and faint whispers echoed from its core. Aaron stared at it, his chest tightening. That's it? Thomas nodded. That's the source of the city's power. Destroy it, and Elysium collapses. Aaron's stomach churned. What happens to you if it collapses? Thomas's hollow eyes darkened. I don't know, but I think I'm already too far gone to care. Aaron swallowed hard and stepped closer to the heart. The whispers grew louder, sharper, forming words that curled around his mind like smoke. Aaron, stop. You don't have to do this. Stay with us. Stay in Elysium. He hesitated, his hand trembling. The glowing tendrils around the heart began to shift, their movements slow and serpentine. And then, the shadows emerged. They spilled from the edges of the chamber, their swirling black forms glowing faintly with the same red light as their eyes. Aaron froze as the shadows surrounded him, their elongated limbs twisting unnaturally as they glided closer. Thomas stepped forward, his glowing veins flaring brightly. "I'll hold them off," he said, his voice strained. "You focus on the heart." Aaron's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? You can't fight them." Thomas didn't respond. He stepped between Aaron and the shadows, his arms outstretched as the glowing veins in his body burned brighter. The shadows screeched, their forms writhing as they lunged toward him. Aaron turned back to the heart, his chest heaving. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they formed a deafening roar. "Aaron, don't destroy us. We can give you peace. We can give you anything you desire." He clenched his fists, his mind racing. "What do I do?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. Thomas's voice rang out behind him, sharp and desperate. "Break it!" Aaron hesitated for only a moment before grabbing a large, jagged stone from the ground. He raised it high above his head, the whispers turning into piercing screams. And then, he swung. The stone slammed into the crystalline heart with a deafening crack, sending shards of glowing light splintering into the air. The heart pulsed violently, its glow flickering as the tendrils holding it aloft began to unravel. The ground beneath Aaron's feet trembled, and the chamber was filled with an ear-splitting roar. The shadows shrieked, their forms twisting and dissipating like smoke caught in a storm. Aaron swung the stone again and again, each impact sending more cracks spider-webbing across the surface of the heart. "Almost there," Thomas shouted, his voice strained. With one final swing, the heart shattered, its pieces exploding outward in a blinding flash of light. Aaron was thrown backward, his body slamming against one of the stone pillars. For a moment, there was silence. And then, the city screamed. The walls of the chamber began to collapse, the glowing patterns fading into darkness. The ground buckled and cracked, and the streams of glowing liquid evaporated into mist. Thomas staggered toward Aaron, his hollow eyes wide with fear. "The city's falling apart," he said. "We have to move." Aaron scrambled to his feet, his body aching as he followed Thomas up the crumbling staircase. The streets of Elysium were chaos. Buildings collapsed into rubble, the glowing residents disintegrating into ash as the city's energy drained away. The once blinding lights faded into dim embers, and the hum of the city's power fell silent. Aaron and Thomas ran through the crumbling streets, the ground splitting beneath their feet. Finally, they reached the edge of the city, the clearing where Aaron had first arrived. He turned back for one last look. Elysium was gone. Nothing remained but an empty void, slowly swallowed by the encroaching mist. Aaron collapsed onto the grass, his chest heaving as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees. Thomas stood beside him, his glowing veins flickering faintly before fading away entirely. "You did it," Thomas said softly. "You destroyed it." Aaron looked up at him, his voice weak. "Are we free?" Thomas hesitated before nodding. "For now." The clearing was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. Aaron sat on the cold grass, his chest still heaving as the adrenaline slowly drained from his veins. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of gold and pink, a sharp contrast to the glowing chaos of Elysium that had filled the night. It was gone. Nothing remained of the city. No ruins, no lights, no shadows. Just the empty clearing, surrounded by dense forest. Aaron turned to Thomas, who stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the misty expanse where the city had once been. "You said we're free," Aaron said, his voice hoarse. "But you don't sound sure." Thomas didn't look at him. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, and the faint glow that had once coursed through his veins was completely gone now. Freedom comes at a cost, Thomas said softly. Aaron frowned. What kind of cost? Thomas finally turned to face him, his hollow eyes filled with something Aaron hadn't seen before. Fear. Elysium wasn't just a place, Thomas said. It was alive. And things like that, they don't die quietly. Aaron stood slowly, his body aching with every movement. What are you saying? That the city's still out there? Thomas shook his head. Not exactly, but its echoes, its reach, doesn't just vanish. The city was connected to something deeper, something older than we can understand. Aaron's stomach twisted. Older? Like what? Some kind of ancient civilization? Thomas hesitated. More like a hunger. A force that built Elysium as a way to lure people in, to feed on them. It used the city as a mask, but now that the mask is gone, Aaron felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. You think whatever was behind Elysium is still out there? Thomas nodded slowly. And now, it's untethered. Aaron's heart pounded. So what do we do? Just wait for it to find us again? Thomas's hollow eyes darkened. No, we run. They left the clearing together, retracing Aaron's path through the dense forest. The sunlight filtering through the canopy did little to ease the oppressive weight that hung in the air. Every step felt heavier, every shadow seemed deeper, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. You said the city chose me, Aaron said, after a long silence. Why? Why me? Thomas's lips pressed into a thin line. It didn't just choose you, Aaron. It chooses people who are... He paused, searching for the right word. Vulnerable. People with regrets, with unresolved pain. The city feeds on those things. Aaron's jaw tightened. So, it saw me as easy prey? Thomas glanced at him. It saw you as someone it could trap, but you proved it wrong. Aaron didn't respond. By the time they reached the dirt road where Aaron had left his car, the sun was high in the sky. The world felt normal again. Too normal. Aaron's car was exactly where he'd left it, its dusty frame shimmering faintly in the sunlight. But something felt off. Thomas stopped abruptly, his body tense. What is it? Aaron asked, his voice low. Thomas's hollow eyes scanned the tree line. We're not alone. Aaron's pulse quickened. He turned slowly, his eyes darting across the forest. At first he saw nothing, just the dense trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. But then he saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road. It was humanoid, but its outline shimmered faintly, like heat rising off asphalt. Its features were indistinct, but its eyes, two faintly glowing orbs, burned through the haze. Aaron's breath hitched. What the hell is that? Thomas's voice was grim. An echo. The figure stepped closer, its movements smooth and unnatural. Aaron took a step back, his heart pounding. I thought you said the city was gone. It is, Thomas said, but the things it left behind, they're still connected to us, to you. The figure stopped a few feet away, its glowing eyes fixed on Aaron, and then it spoke. Aaron Cole, you belong to us. The voice was sharp, fragmented, like a recording played on a broken speaker. Aaron's blood turned to ice. No, I destroyed the heart. I ended it. The figure tilted its head. The heart was a door, not an end. You opened it, Aaron, and now we are free. Thomas grabbed Aaron's arm. We need to go. Now. They climbed into the car, slamming the door shut as the figure moved closer. Aaron fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up dirt as they sped down the road. The figure didn't follow. But as they drove, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching them. The silence in the car was suffocating. What did it mean? Aaron asked finally. About the heart being a door? Thomas stared out the window, his expression grim. The heart wasn't the source of Elysium's power, he said. It was a conduit, a way for the force behind the city to reach into our world. By destroying it, you didn't stop it. You freed it. Aaron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. So, what do we do now? Just keep running? Thomas didn't answer. They drove for hours, the dense forest giving way to open fields and winding highways. The further they went, the heavier Aaron's chest felt, like an invisible weight pressing down on him. By the time the sun began to set, they reached a small, run-down motel on the edge of a quiet town. Thomas insisted they stop for the night. Aaron hesitated but finally agreed, pulling into the cracked parking lot. The motel was eerily quiet, its faded sign flickering faintly in the dim light. As they checked in, the old woman at the front desk gave them a strange look. "You boys passing through?" she asked, her voice rough. Aaron nodded. "Yeah. Just needed a place to rest." She glanced at Thomas, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Thomas didn't respond. That night, Aaron lay awake in the small, musty motel room, staring at the cracked ceiling. The weight in his chest hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown heavier, like something was pressing against his very soul. Beside him, Thomas sat in the chair by the window, staring out into the darkness. Aaron finally broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this?" Thomas didn't turn. His voice was barely above a whisper. "No." Aaron's stomach churned. "Then, what's the point? Why keep running?" Thomas turned to face him, his hollow eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "Because running is all we have left." The night stretched on, oppressive and unnaturally silent. Aaron lay on the stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Outside, the faint hum of cicadas was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Thomas sat by the window, motionless, his hollow eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. "You feel it too, don't you?" Aaron asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas didn't look at him. "It's getting closer." Aaron sat up, his heart pounding. "What is? The echoes?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "No, the force behind them, the thing that controlled Elysium. It's not just following us, Aaron, it's spreading." Aaron's chest tightened. "Spreading? You mean it's growing?" Thomas's lips pressed into a thin line. "The heart was a door, and when you destroyed it, you didn't just free us, you unleashed it." Aaron ran a hand through his hair, his stomach churning. "So, what do we do? How do we stop it?" Thomas turned to face him, his voice low and heavy. "We don't stop it. We contain it." The weight of Thomas's words hung in the air, suffocating and final. "Contain it?" Aaron repeated, his voice rising. "How? It's not like we can just put it back in the city. It's gone." Thomas's hollow eyes flickered faintly, like the last dying embers of a fire. "There's another way," he said softly, "but it's not easy. And it's not something we'll walk away from." Aaron's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" Thomas leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "The force behind Elysium, call it a spirit, a demon, whatever you want, it needs an anchor to stay in this world. The city was its anchor for centuries, but now that it's gone, it's looking for a new one." Aaron's throat tightened. "An anchor? You mean a person?" Thomas nodded. "Someone it can bind itself to, someone who can contain it and keep it from spreading." Aaron stared at him, his stomach twisting. "And you're saying that someone has to be one of us?" Thomas's expression darkened. "It's the only way." The room felt colder now, the air heavy with tension. Aaron stood abruptly, pacing the small space. "There has to be another way. Maybe we can trap it, like an exorcism or something." Thomas shook his head. This isn't a ghost, Aaron. It's older than anything we can understand. The only way to stop it is to willingly take its place. Aaron turned to face him, his voice sharp. And what happens to the person who becomes the anchor? What happens to you? Thomas hesitated. They'll cease to exist, at least as they are now. The force will consume them, bind itself to them. They'll become part of it, just like the city was. Aaron's stomach churned. That's not containment, Thomas. That's sacrifice. Thomas's hollow eyes met his. Sometimes, sacrifice is the only choice. The night dragged on, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint creak of the motel's wooden frame. Aaron sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. His mind replayed everything. Elysium's glowing streets, the shadows, the whispers from the heart. Why did it have to be us? He muttered. Thomas stood by the window, his voice soft. Because we were the ones who found it, and because we were the ones who destroyed it. Aaron clenched his fists. You think this is our fault? Thomas didn't answer. At some point, Aaron must have drifted off, because he woke to the sound of faint whispers. His eyes snapped open, his heart pounding. The room was dark, the pale moonlight streaming through the thin curtains. Thomas, he called out. There was no response. Aaron sat up, his chest tight. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and echoing, like a dozen voices speaking in unison. He turned toward the window and froze. Thomas was gone. The chair was empty, the faint imprint of his body the only sign he'd been there. Aaron's pulse quickened. Thomas? A faint glow caught his eye. On the nightstand was a piece of paper, its edges singed and curling. Aaron picked it up with trembling hands. Aaron, I've made my choice. I'm sorry. Don't follow me. Thomas. Aaron burst out of the motel room, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. Thomas, he shouted into the darkness. The road was empty, the faint glow of the town's streetlights barely piercing the fog that had crept in from the forest. Aaron's chest heaved as he scanned the empty parking lot, and then he saw it. A faint glow in the distance, pulsing faintly through the trees. His stomach dropped. No, 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 no. He took off running, his boots pounding against the asphalt as he sprinted toward the light. The whispers grew louder, sharper, clawing at his mind as he pushed deeper into the woods. Finally, he reached a clearing and stopped dead in his tracks. Thomas stood in the center of the clearing, his body glowing faintly with the same light that had once pulsed through Elysium's walls. The shadows surrounded him, their forms writhing and twisting, their glowing red eyes locked onto him. And at the center of it all was the Force, a swirling mass of black and gold, its tendrils reaching out toward Thomas like hungry claws. Aaron stepped forward, his voice breaking. Thomas, don't do this. Thomas turned to him, his hollow eyes softening. I have to, Aaron, he said. It's the only way. No, Aaron shouted, his fists clenched. There has to be another way. We can fight this together. Thomas shook his head. The city chose me a long time ago. I've been running ever since. But now, I can finally stop. Aaron's vision blurred with tears. Thomas. The swirling mass surged forward, its tendrils wrapping around Thomas's body. He let out a sharp gasp, his veins flaring with golden light as the Force consumed him. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into mist as the clearing was filled with a blinding flash of light. And then, silence. When the light faded, Aaron stood alone in the clearing. The forest was still. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air finally lifted. Thomas was gone. Aaron's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the ground, his chest heaving as tears streamed down his face. The faint glow of dawn broke through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. In the distance, a faint hum echoed through the air, soft, almost imperceptible. Aaron turned toward it, his chest tightening, and there, at the edge of the clearing, stood a faint outline. A figure, glowing faintly with golden light. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But Aaron knew. Thomas was still there, and Elysium wasn't gone.